Hello and welcome to Hot Pursuit and Ahval Forum. This is a special transmission in relation to the expected statement by the US President Joe Biden. Today, 24th of April, Saturday, President Biden recognized the mass killings of Armenians over a century ago, 106 years ago to be exact, as genocide. That's a move that diverges from his predecessors and probably threatens to further complicate the already complicated relations with NATO ally Turkey. He said, "The American people honor all those Armenians who perished in the genocide that began 106 years ago today and continued, and we remember so that we remain ever vigilant against the corrosive influence of hate in all its forms. Each year on this day, we remember the lives of all those who died in the Ottoman-era Armenian genocide and recommit ourselves to preventing such an atrocity from ever again occurring." It's quite a long text, but I will stop here and I will introduce you to my guests to you. And we begin with Merve Tahiroğlu, Turkey Director of Project on Middle East and Democracy. Hi, Merve.
Hi, Yavuz. Thanks for having me on.
Second in line is Stephen Cook from Council on Foreign Relations. Good to have you here, Stephen.
Good day.
And Henri Barkey, professor with Lehigh University. Hello, Henri.
Hello. Nice to see you.
Ryan Gingeras, whose title is slightly more complicated. He's a professor with the postgraduate Naval School. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Postgraduate School.
Naval Postgraduate School. Okay.
Rolls off the tongue.
All right. Welcome everyone, and let's evaluate and assess this statement and its impact and its consequences. We begin with Merve. How did you find the text, and what is your comment about this?
Well, of course, it's a very important day for Armenian Americans who have been waiting for this kind of a statement and acknowledgement for many decades now. So I think in that sense, it's a very good day for them. I think the statement itself was really well written and well crafted. If we think about what it's hoping to achieve without creating a diplomatic crisis with Turkey while trying to achieve that recognition of a historical reality. So I think it was really well phrased in that it called it an Ottoman-era Armenian genocide. The statement actually doesn't mention Turkey. So I think in that sense, it's actually taking into consideration some of Turkey's, the Turkish government's and the Turkish state's sensitivities around this recognition and this term, but at the same time, the statement very clearly says that we acknowledge this pain and we acknowledge this history so that we can prevent further atrocities from happening again in the future, and not to cast blame, but in order to prevent these things from happening in the future. And that's exactly why it's important to recognize these kinds of atrocities and label them for what they are in order to prevent this. So I think the statement very much achieves that. I wish actually that the president made this historic acknowledgement with a speech rather than a statement. But I think even so, the statement is really well written. So I think it both has done something really important in that it was a mistake, I think, for the U.S. Government not to make this recognition for many decades out of deference to Turkey for political reasons, but at the same time, it was really well phrased in that it was very careful, I think, not to cast blame on the Turkish government for this particular thing.
But in earlier statements, always those Turks, Ottoman Turks who helped Armenians were sort of mentioned, but this time they were not there. Merve.
Sorry, the Turks who were mentioned?
Ottoman Turks, the good guys, good people, good Turks, they were not mentioned in the text. They were mentioned in the earlier statements by the presidents.
Well, it's a very short statement, and I think it's pretty accurate in terms of it. Very clearly says that the purpose of this statement is to acknowledge what happened in history and to put it in record and to share the pain. And so I think instead of delving into the actual history, I think it's a very concise and well worded statement that really is there for one purpose only, and I think that it achieves it. So in that sense, it's not a very politicized text. I think it's a very straightforward text and very well phrased one.
Stephen, do you agree?
Well, I picked up on precisely the same point that Merve did, was that the fact that it was called the Ottoman, it kind of jumped out of the page to me that the administration emphasized this as something that happened during the Ottoman era. The question, though, and I certainly agree, it sort of laid it out in a kind of dispassionate way and said, it is incumbent upon us to recognize the Armenian genocide in order that atrocities aren't repeated. The question I have is that given the political sensitivities and how politicized it has been, is whether those nuances were lost in Ankara. Already ahead of the statement, you saw how the opposition was lining up with President Erdogan and the Justice and Development Party. Former diplomats were tweeting, current diplomats were tweeting about it, that this is something that is raw for Turkey. It is something that can be used as a kind of nationalist cudgel and so that what has been lacking in Turkey has been an ability to talk about this issue in an open and honest way and to get beyond it, precisely because of nationalist politics. I'm not casting aspersions on Turks. There's many Turks I know who are willing to have in private a conversation about the realities of the Armenian genocide and recognize what actually happened. But in the political sphere, in political debate, this has become, it is something that's virtually impossible. So it strikes me that the nuance, the intended nuance, the sensitivities in which the Biden administration and the president advanced this statement may in fact be lost, and something that I'm sure we'll talk about in the rest of the time that we're on will have an impact on U.S.-Turkey relations, which are already in trouble. But I do think, in general, underline what Merve said. This was as good a statement as you're going to get. They clearly were trying to avoid doing more damage to the bilateral relationship and trying to signal to Turkish leaders and political actors that there was a temporal issue, that this happened during the Ottoman Empire. I just wonder whether these signals, given all of the problems in the U.S.-Turkey relationship, whether these signals are really going to get through.
Arnie, what's your take on the text statement?
Look, the text is very measured. It's very well crafted. The best statement that you can get under these circumstances. But the reason there is such a big reaction now in Turkey, and this reaction is going to get stronger as we go along, is that
it was expected.
What?
The reactions were expected, though.
Right, but we've been playing this game now every year. Every year, is the president going to say something about April 24th? So you've had this accumulation of frustration, if you want, anticipation, another, or annoyance that you have to go through this again. So it's become much harder today. And I would hazard to say that if this had been done 20 years ago, 30 years ago, by now it would be something that we would forget and would not be paying that much attention to it. It's just the accumulation of year after year of this game that has made this a lot worse than expected.
Mm-hmm. And Ryan?
I don't have much to add here. I think everybody's kind of, singing in the same key. I think I'm just speaking as somebody who's interested in the history of this. It didn't do too much to wade into the history of it, other than to sort of state the reality of the result. And I think what I think is more fascinating is that it was preceded with a phone call yesterday. Not to pull any punches, as if this is not something that has already been sort of in the news cycle going back earlier in the week. And I'm sure we'll get to it. I think it's certainly seen as setting the tone for, I think, a much more blunt relationship on Washington's part towards Ankara.
Going back again to the statement. Now, of course, the reactions, as mentioned by Henri, are just the beginning. And the only opposition party singled out is the pro-Kurdish HDP, which already is under fire, especially by Devlet Bahçeli, basically, roughly commented. He's tweeted asking that the HDP will be wiped out from the political map. Should be wiped out from the political map because of the position that it has taken vis-a-vis the Armenian genocide issue. And we will see a hardening of climate. But let's leave aside the domestic side, reverberations in terms of Turkish-American relations. A levee has broken, basically. A threshold has been passed. And this was, why of it is quite obvious. It is because of the value of the alliance over 7 decades. This was not the preference or choice of the American administrations to call it Armenian genocide. That was one of the main reasons. But now we see that levee broken. And how can we explain this one? And what will be the repercussions of it in terms of Turkish-American relations, also in terms of perhaps Turkish-NATO relations. We begin again with Merve. If you can interfere with each other if you want, if there is something to add or disagree, go on.
Well, I think actually the repercussions aren't at the end of the day going to be as big as some people seem to be suggesting it to be. It's important in that it's symbolically very important. Turkey has spent a lot of resources on trying to stop this recognition again for many years. So it's not even just something not just the resources that they have poured into this, into lobbying against this year, but also the accumulation of all of that for many years. So in that sense, a levee has been broken. I think we've crossed the threshold. And when I came to Washington almost a decade ago, it was really, everyone was telling me that it was really unthinkable for a US president to recognize this. And this is something that the Armenians have been trying to do every year, but that it would never happen. So in that sense, I think the fact that it has happened shows just how much the Turkey-US relationship has changed. And I think that this administration in particular, but also Washington in general, I think no longer has the same kind of tolerance towards Turkish sensitivities, particularly when it comes to these kinds of nationalist positions that Turkey has that often clash with international norms and ways of thinking. And there used to be this kind of tolerance towards Turkey's more nationalist positions, I think, here in Washington because of the alliance between the two countries and the importance, the value that Washington attached to that alliance with Turkey. But right now we're in a very different place than that. I think we're no longer really talking about an alliance. Even the phone call with President Biden, he said that the readout of it said that the president emphasizes interest in expanding cooperation with Turkey, but didn't really say like the previous statements would have been, previous phone calls and readouts would have said, started off by acknowledging and emphasizing the importance of the relationship, but this one emphasized the U.S. interest in having a positive relationship with Turkey rather than emphasizing the positive relationship itself. I'm very glad that President Biden called Erdogan before making this statement because of its symbolic importance, and to give him a heads up. It really looked like, I think last week, to me this week, that he actually might do this without giving Erdogan and his counterparts in Ankara a heads up, which I think would have been a pretty bad and disrespectful move towards Turkey. So Biden didn't do that. He followed procedure, I think, due process, and he called Erdogan and said that I'm about to make this statement, just so you know, and address some of the other parts of the relationship, but ultimately did it. He didn't cower away from making such a decision. And then he also, what's important, I think, is that he said we will have a one-on-one meeting in June at the NATO meeting. So I think that also gives that's a message to Ankara that there is some time and there are steps that Ankara could take between now and that meeting in June that could help improve the ties. So, and I think that the Turkish side is going to, I hope that they will understand this, take this message and use this message to change behavior and policies over the next month or so, so that we can have improved ties rather than completely breaking the relationship. And already the reactions coming to this genocide recognition, I think they're pretty strong in rhetoric, but they're not make or break, and it's not become a huge crisis as many people expected it to be. And I think that's because there are such deep problems in the bilateral relationship that this is not something that's going to be a top priority.
Stephen, I think you were one of the first who went deeper into the nature of the relations between the United States and Turkey in the past year, I believe, coining the phrase neither friend nor foe. And also when Joe Biden won the elections, there were a series of reports by various think tanks, and I interviewed almost all of them. And this was on more or less the same line. And the readout of President Joe Biden, it says, President Joe Biden conveying his interest in a constructive bilateral relationship with expanded areas of cooperation and effective management of disagreements. This is in sync with what Max Hoffman's report for the Center for American Progress in broad lines entered into, Nick Danforth's report for, I believe it was for Brookings, and various other big or small reports were on the same line. So talking about reverberations, is it fair to say that after this levee being broken, entering into an area where the relations are or have to be redefined between Washington and Ankara?
Well, I think that was the line of the readout that was really the most interesting to me, where it said, effective management of problems between the two countries. I think, which was a frank admission of the long list of problems between the two countries. The problem is that whatever mechanisms we have put in place, including by those people who are currently running this account, really haven't worked. The kind of intensive dialogue with Turkey that people have called for as a way of overcoming the obstacles in the relationship really haven't worked. And that's part of the way in which I've looked at the relationship, and saying in the sense that we have to really recognize in redefining this relationship that those common interests that we talked about, the common goals that we talked about, the common values that we talked about for many years in the relationship, first of all, was a narrative that was in part based on myths. And now, 30 years after the Cold War, I think we're seeing the real differences between the two countries in terms of interest, goals, and values. And so that in my own work, the way I look at effective management of problems is that where Turkey opposes the United States and the United States opposes Turkey, we shouldn't be shy about that. In places where there is a confluence of interests, of course we should want to work with Turkey. Turkey is a big, important country in its region. And in those places where the stakes aren't as high, we probably need to work in parallel or get out of each other's way. But without this expectation that there be a strategic relationship, whatever that even means. I mean, people use that term so much in Washington, it's lost all of its value. But we should not have the expectations of, partnership and the kinds of things, the way in which we talked about Turkey over many years. I think that's the most effective way to manage our relationship. Oppose Turkey where we must, work with them where we can, and get out of each other's way where it's possible. A couple of things I just want to pick up on what Merve was talking about, and the levee breaking, and Yavuz, I know why you use that phrase, given your love of classic rock and roll. It strikes me that the state of the relationship is one part of it. And I'll get to that in a second, but I think that there's two other factors that have contributed to this. And I know Ryan's written about this, so he should really expound on it as well. One, this is something that has actually interested Joe Biden for some time. When he was in the Senate, he in fact championed legislation concerning genocide. Second, I think that what this administration has done, and I think has been actually surprising to many in the foreign policy community, is that they have been, up to this point, and granted it's only been 100 days, up to this point, have been good to the word about injecting values into American foreign policy. And if you're going to have a values-forward American foreign policy, well, then it's almost, you kind of have to recognize the Armenian genocide. And then finally, on this relationship thing, look, in 10 years, the Turks haven't given anybody a reason not to recognize the Armenian genocide. Previously, the argument was, Turkey's too important a partner. We don't want to push them in. But the way in which the Turks have conducted their foreign policy, the way in which they've undermined the United States at critical moments, hasn't given anybody a reason not to do this. Why shouldn't the president, given those other two factors? I said my piece. So.
Mm-hmm. And Ryan, yes, most of it has to do, I think, the point, coming to this point, I think, writing or issuing this statement has had to do, I believe, with the changing nature of the alliance between two countries, and there was not much of it left, and there was all the trust had gone, especially between leaderships after the departure of Trump, especially. And the same question goes to you. I mean, what is again, based on the readout of Joe Biden and this important phrase, where does it lead us in terms of relations between two countries?
I mean, I think in the grand scheme of things, I don't see this as a big milestone, in the sense that if we're to judge this moment by other moments of recognition, be it France or Russia or Holland or even Germany, I mean, there's a little bit of, Sturm and Drang, and then it kind of goes away. I think, I mean, and I can't speak to what led to this decision internally, at least in terms of the kind of the way in which it was balanced or discussed. But I'm sure that has to be a factor, that that this is something that has happened before vis-a-vis other countries, including countries that Turkey has a more direct relationship with, and even more multidimensional. And you take a country like Germany, which is not only a NATO ally, but one that's very much tied to the economically both ways. So I mean, I think that's a part of it. I think this whole episode is very much insulated from other elements of the relationship. Stephen and Merve, and you referenced NATO. I think the NATO relationship kind of runs on its own, under its own steam. It's, I think mill to mill relations in Turkey is governed by its own sort of universe of laws and rules. And so I think, that aspect of it, I think is something very, very different. The one thing I would add so far is that, I think Biden, I think Stephen's probably right, that there is a bit more personal investment here from the president compared to past presidents. But I would also say that, what has also changed is the climate in Congress. I think also the climate scholarly wise, that there is, I think now more than ever, a really, really strong consensus among scholars regarding, this judgment that what happened in 1915 was a genocide. And I think that, I wouldn't necessarily overrate the influence of scholars as sort of pushing this forward, but I think that there is kind of within the broader echo chamber of Congress's interactions with lobbying groups, Congress's interactions with experts, there's far less uncertainty about what is being said, as opposed to maybe 20 or 30 or more years ago, where experts may have been, kind of come into play in consulting with Congress or consulting with the State Department, who had said, yeah, there's a reason for it being called a genocide, but there may be reasons not. I don't think that that's the case anymore. I think that more than ever, there is a body of literature that exists that obviously is just generally ignored in Turkey, that I think really makes a clear argument for recognition, if for no other reasons that it's a historical reality. So I think that's a part of the story too that is going to be, should be considered, at least with respect to this thing. But I think in terms of the broader relationship, I think there's lots of other things that I think are insulated from this decision.
Going back to the metaphor that Stephen and I love so much, levee being broken, it means there are more or less 30-some countries that recognized this as a genocide. I think this levee being broken may lead to another wave of recognitions by other countries which had their eyes on White House. This may be expected. But still sticking to the same question, Henri, what is your comment on that nature of relations?
Look, everybody says the Turkish-American relationship is really at a nadir. So it's been at every level. You can say that the Turks and Americans don't seem to get along. Big differences over S-400s, Syrian Kurds, Fethullah Gulen being in the United States, Halkbank, amazing amount of anti-Americanism that comes out of the mouth of Erdogan. The fact that the Turkish authorities took Foreign Service nationals working for the US government and imprisoned them. So there's been a lot of real bad blood between the two. And it's true that as a result of this, there probably isn't anyone in Washington, whether in Congress, state, or defense, or any other bureaucracy, that is willing to stake the neck out for Turkey. And even people who used to be part of the Turkish lobby voted against Turkey in Congress the other day. Having said all of this, I will argue that even if this relationship was not bad, even if they had a good relationship, there was a good relationship between Turkey and the United States, Biden was going to do it. And the reasons are twofold, I think. One is what Stephen talked about, that there's a long-term commitment on the part of Biden to say something. But that's also true of many other presidents who have many times said, oh, yes, I will recognize it. But there's something different about Biden. Biden is, if you look at his policies so far in the 94 days that he's been in power, he has gone against the grain on just about everything. Big stimulus plan, big infrastructure, everything that people said could not be done. And he is trying to prove something, I think, that he is a different president, that he's fearless, and that he was going to recognize this no matter what. This was something he had decided, and nobody would be able to stop him. Look at previous presidents, except for Trump, of course. All of them kind of thought, they came up with new expressions. They all these contortions. Biden was very, very clear from the beginning. And I would also argue that this is my, shall we say, primitive psychological analysis of Biden. This is also against Obama, because Obama, who had said he was going to recognize it, went through these amazing contortions and came up with this other word to explain. And Biden comes in and says, you know what, you didn't have the guts to do it, I'm doing it. And remember, the relationship between Biden and Obama wasn't great, right, because of the way Obama treated Biden. So this is maybe I'm completely wrong, but this is a tiny way in which Biden is putting also Obama in his place. If that's the reason, that's fine.
Yeah, sorry about that. The last tour, I'm going to ask each and every one of you about possible dimensions of reverberations. Domestically, for example, Merve, immediately, as I mentioned, Devlet Bahçeli, the immediate reaction in relation possibly with this was again another massive cross-border operation into Iraqi Kurdistan, which is continuing. It was air raids last night, immediately when the Blinken-Çavuşoğlu talk was revealing that the statement would include the words Armenian Genocide. And this morning, also the land forces entering into Iraqi Kurdistan. And this is also in relation, domestically speaking, the possible preparations for wiping out the deputies, at least from Turkish parliament, the Kurdish deputies. How would you see that? Do you see it as a serious and consistent development that we may expect?
Well, Turkey is going through a phase right now with heightened crackdowns and repression, and that's because Erdogan's own popularity is at a historic low, and he's facing, I think, public discontent among the Turkish voters more than he ever has. And so in reaction to that, the more cornered he feels, he's dialing up his repression and his repression of Kurdish civil society, Kurdish politicians, and this party are all part of that. In terms of this US recognition of the genocide, I think Erdogan is going to try to use this to increase anti-Americanism in Turkey. He's going to respond to the United States, saying, "Who are you to teach us a lesson?" They're already putting out statements and having PR strategies that are towards painting the US as a sort of an adversary of Turkey, and that the fact that the US took this step, Biden took this step, I think they're going to try to paint this as a punishment of Turkey of some sorts because of the symbolic value of this. And I think that this, in terms of domestic repercussions, it's certainly not going to help the Turkish government or people in Turkey to recognize the genocide, or the Turkish parliament to recognize the genocide. Of course, the statement is going to help that in no way, which is the most important thing that should be happening. You talked about a possible wave of recognitions. Of course, the most important party that has to recognize this is Turkey. And I don't think this is going to help that, but I also don't think it's going to hurt that, as some people suggest that this statement might in fact, hurt the status of Armenians and Armenian citizens of Turkey, or Turkey's relationship with this recognition itself. I don't think it's going to have much of an effect in that sense. And I think I take all of Henri's points about President Biden. I also think that he's trying to do a lot of things showing that he's a different kind of president, particularly one that places more of a premium on human rights in his foreign policy. But with that, I would say that, recognizing this genocide, which happened 106 years ago, is an important step in that. But there are huge human rights crises that are going on in Turkey right now. So I think what I would expect the Biden administration, if it really cares about human rights, that with regards to Turkey, it should also be raising what's going on in Turkey right now and the oppression that Turkish people are under right now, in order to be able to, I think, follow through with his campaign promise with regards to what he was going to do with his foreign policy.
Ryan, staying in the domestic scene again, we have seen Turkish opposition, the sort of center opposition, except HDP, lining up behind Erdogan whenever something against Turkish state was happening in international stage. The same thing will most likely to happen from tomorrow on. Do you think Erdogan thrives on that? Which could thrive on that? What will be his chances or choices?
To the extent I follow this issue pretty closely, at least in terms of not simply how Erdogan deals with this issue, but I think sort of institutionally in Turkey how this issue is dealt with. it's often dealt with as if, recognition happened a long time ago. I mean, I think that there, yes, it's a big deal that one can point to an official statement that, the U.S. and a U.S. administration recognizes the Armenian genocide. But if you read, any number of websites that are associated with the Turkish government or with Turkish educational institutions, much of it is geared towards what is commonly perceived as that everybody in the world already recognizes the Armenian genocide as a genocide, and that it is a part of Turkish identity. It's a part of in just sort of the essence of Turkey to affirm what they think is the truth that it wasn't. So, I mean, I don't know if it necessarily, I mean, it certainly adds to the mood music, if you will, of what's happening, generally speaking, in Turkey, which is, an increasingly more nationalistic climate, an increasingly more intolerant climate towards dissent. It's a climate in which Erdogan will use each and every opportunity to try to consolidate control. It's an atmosphere where I think, and this is where I would sort of emphasize, add to what I think Merve was saying, and which I obviously completely agree with, is that I think there are lots of people who are looking forward to a time when Erdogan may not be out of power, but becoming that much more dependent upon allies, that they're looking to assert their own voice into the political process. I'm sure Bahçeli is a big, sort of example of this, but there's a whole variety of people on the left and right who are looking to use this opportunity to be seen and be heard, and to shape the way the country's politics is unfolding, exclusive of Erdogan. So in some ways, I think, you could read this also as an expression of Erdogan's continued, I think, sort of degraded position within the administration. He's not, I mean, I think it's a duality of that. Yes, he's undeniably quite strong, but I think at the same time, he's also, his position is eroding, and that there are sort of larger numbers of people who are taking advantage of that. And I think something like this allows an opportunity, again, to be seen and heard within Ankara. And the people who will obviously lose out are those who are already being sort of kicked around quite a bit. HDP, who anybody left within public spheres who are associated with being Atlanticists or pro-Western or what have you. So I think it's just more of the same, but that much more intense.
Stephen, this genocide statement comes at a time Turkey's relations with Europe also at somewhat all-time low. Recently, Italian Prime Minister Mario Draghi, in a statement, sort of connected two words, Erdogan and dictator, and didn't retract at all. He was not interested. And also on Thursday, European Parliament basically called for the termination of the accession process, again, in a more strong words, based on the very strong, hard report on human rights and the collapse of the judiciary in Turkey. Better late than never, but it was there. And, seen from the higher altitude now, do you think all these things combined now, are they going to push Erdogan's Turkey more, Erdogan and Bahçeli's Turkey more towards Russia, or maybe should we see more isolationist period in the future?
It's a great question, Yavuz, and I think it's one in which I think there's a lot of speculation about the direction of Turkey, especially in Washington. For years, people had said you can't recognize the Armenian genocide because it'll push Turkey in a certain way. You can't do something else with regard to Turkey because it'll push them in the direction of the Russians or the Iranians. I'm not sure that in Turkey people are looking at it that way. What strikes me is happening in Turkey is that the Turkish leadership is looking for political advantage through its foreign policy wherever it can get it, because the prime directive for President Erdogan is to be the president of the Turkish Republic on its 100th anniversary. So during which he could say, look at how much I have undermine the institutions of the republic. So I think that there's no clear trajectory for Turkish foreign policy these days. Certainly, the relationship between the United States and Turkey is damaged. And I agree with Ryan in the sense that, we need to get away from the kind of catastrophism. I mean, the recognition of the genocide is sort of baked into Turkish political culture. It's almost as if it already has. But the fact that the president has now done this and that people are making a big deal of it adds to a very long list of problems between the two countries that one can't help but draw the conclusion that this is going to be a very difficult relationship. The problem with driving Erdogan into the arms of the Russians is that he has his own problems with the Russians, given the Turkish position with regard to Ukraine. He seems to be hammered there. What you find in Turkey is a country that is isolated because there's been a distinct lack of strategic thinking, because so much of Turkish foreign policy has been a determinant of Erdogan's domestic political needs. So if you didn't want to have, I think it was Henri and Ryan who pointed out that, the environment for recognizing the Armenian genocide in Washington is fertile, more fertile now than it has ever been before. Again, if the Turkish government did not act in the way it had, where it went from having many, many friends in Washington to having no friends, where to the point where, the organized American Jewish community advocated against recognition of the Armenian genocide. I mean, that is a strange thing, if there ever was a strange thing. And now they have played that so badly in both their domestic and foreign policies that no one would advocate for them. So Turkey is isolated in Europe. It's isolated from the United States. It's isolated from the countries around it. It has difficulties with the Russians. And I think
the Arab world as well.
And the Arab world. And I think what you're going to see is a more insular, prickly, nationalist, nastier kind of foreign policy from Turkey, which I think probably suits Erdogan well, and Bahçeli well right now. I think what the political dynamics, certainly, I think Ryan's suggesting that perhaps this provides an opportunity for more voices is a possibility, but there's also the equal, and I think we need to keep it, within the realm of possibilities that, this is the kind of thing that hammers everybody and forces them to line up, that you're either, going to take the nationals, or you're going to be subject to attack for not being sufficiently opposed to the American genocide resolution. Therefore, you are complicit with those who want to harm the Turkish nation. Go ahead, Ryan. Sorry.
Just to kind of clarify exactly what I was saying, I think this is, as I say it on Twitter yesterday, I mean, this is very much a part of the profession of faith of being Turkish. You cannot, there is no alternative. Turkey, there is no genocide. It is not up for debate. And I think more than anything, though, that there are those in Turkish political life who can talk about this issue more authoritatively because they're closer to the original, I'm going to use a lot of Catholic analogies here, catechism of Turkish nationalism, right? Who are Kemalists, right? Or people who kind of really kind of cloak themselves in the mythos of Mustafa Kemal. And we have to remember, Erdogan and the Erdogan, administration going way back had a kind of wishy-washiness on this issue, because in a very shrewd way to try to get around it, right? And to signal we're not, we're pliable on this to some degree, and don't ask for any more. Right?
Well, I think that's probably true. But now that there's been the recognition, and perhaps recognitions to come, that might have a political effect that makes it harder. However, whatever pliability there was in the past, or whatever. However, and I think it would be an extraordinary thing for those who can cloak themselves in Kemalism and have a rational conversation in the Turkish political arena about this. I think, though, in the short run, you're going to see, I think, a more insular, problematic, somewhat politically unstable Turkey as a result, not directly as a result of the Armenian genocide, but in the combination of all of those things. The Italian prime minister calling the Turkish president a dictator, the European Parliament saying, accession, for all these years we've said, accession is essentially off, but to really call it off says something about where Turkey is. That isolation, though, may actually be beneficial in the short run for Erdogan, even at his weakest. That's all I'm saying.
We'll see about the long run. But last but not least, we are left with one more important or final dimension, Henri. What will this statement mean for Turkey's relations with Armenia? And also, a short while ago, just an hour ago or so, there were reports that Erdogan had talked to Aliyev, and they had agreed of some sort of unified act. Nobody knows what is confederation or closer relation or something. But let's focus on Turkey-Armenia relations. Will there be more tense, or what to expect?
Well, I mean, excuse me. The answer to that is rather obvious, right? That the Turks are going to be upset at the Armenians, and Armenia is an easy target. It's vulnerable. It's weak. It just lost a war, so they're going to tighten up on Armenia to maybe make life more difficult. But look, I just want to come back to some of this discussion. Two important things here. One is that Turkey needs the United States more than the United States needs Turkey. Economic reasons, political reasons, you name it. Turkey has to have American support, otherwise its currency will collapse. Otherwise, investments won't go into Turkey. And at the end of the day, if Erdogan is going to be re-elected, the economy is what's going to decide that. Second, look, Turkey and the United States have lots of disputes, right? We talked about them, the Kurds in Syria, domestic problems, human rights, etc. But the Armenian genocide issue is different because it is a statement. It is not something that when you wake up tomorrow morning that you will still have the same problem that you have with the Kurds of Syria or Fethullah Gülen or whatever. It's done. It's finished. Erdogan is not going to talk to, every time he talks to an American, he's not going to say you have to change this designation that you just announced. Right? It is not a problem that will change over time, that will have repercussions. Turkish troops going into Syria, etc. So that's, or the S-400s to take a much bigger problem, which is really at the root of the Turkish-American problems today. So you have to look at the genocide statement as a different type of issue, right? Which will not influence, I believe, as Ryan also said earlier, the course of Turkish-American relations. The other issues will, and the Turks are quite capable of forgetting things, ignoring things. And here's the Turks getting very upset about the genocide resolution, and yet you're not allowed to talk about what's happening with the Uyghurs in China, in Turkey. If you talk about the Uyghurs, all of Erdogan's newspapers and the other nationalists jump on you and call you all kinds of American ally, etc. So there is a problem. I mean, the Erdogan, who's always number one to come to the defense of people who are being quote unquote subjected to, is completely quiet on the Uyghurs. So I take all this a little bit with a grain of salt. Yes, this announcement was made. 6 months from now, we won't be talking about it anymore.
Okay, so I think that wraps it up. Unless any of you have anything else to say, to add, I will conclude it here. Thank you, Henri Barkey. Thank you, Stephen Cook. Thank you, Ryan Gingeras. And thank you, Merve Tahiroğlu, all from the United States. And we commented and evaluated the Armenian genocide statement by President Biden today. It's sort of a historic moment. And thanks for your comments, and Goodbye to all. Bye-bye.
Thank you.